Good evening, America. Tonight, Iran's top negotiator stood up and called the President of the United States a liar in writing on social media in some of the sharpest language any Iranian official has used since this peace process began. And on the very same day, America's own Secretary of State, after staying conspicuously silent for more than a week, finally spoke up about this deal. And what he said does not match what Trump said and does not match what Vance said either. Tonight, we have three powerful men, Trump, Rubio, and Iran's own Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, all describing the exact same signed agreement in three different ways. And the result is a level of public confusion about America's own peace deal that no administration should ever allow to happen. Stay with me, because tonight we are going to sort out exactly who said what is actually true, and why the cracks in this peace deal are now coming from inside Washington itself, not just from Tehran. Let us start with the fight over frozen funds, because the insults exchanged today were sharp enough to make headlines around the world. Iran's parliament speaker, who also heads the country's negotiating team in talks with the United States, posted directly on social media platform X on Thursday. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf wrote, "America falsely claims our unfrozen assets will buy their agriculture." He continued with language no Iranian official has used publicly in this entire conflict. He wrote, "The only crop we're harvesting is what you, the U.S., planted, decades of mistrust. It's organic, abundant, and homegrown." And then he added one more line that was designed to sting. He said Washington only exports GMO soybeans, broken promises, and trash talk. That is Iran's top negotiator, the same man who has been sitting across the table from Vice President Vance, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff in Switzerland, mocking the United States publicly and directly accusing the American president of lying about the terms of a deal Ghalibaf himself helped negotiate. Here is exactly what triggered this. President Trump posted on Truth Social on Tuesday, June 24th, that some of Iran's frozen assets will be released, in his words, to our farmers and ranchers for the purchase of corn, wheat, soybeans, and more. He said this food is desperately needed in Iran, and that the United States will be purchasing it for them exclusively from America. Vice President Vance had said almost the identical thing days earlier in Switzerland, telling reporters that if Iranian assets are unfrozen, they're going to go to make American farmers richer and feed the Iranian people. Trump went even further this week, putting a specific number on it. He said the initial financial relief under the memorandum would include $500 million in American goods specifically. Iran's negotiator rejected every part of that framing. According to Iran's semi-official Mehr news agency, Ghalibaf, speaking during a diplomatic visit to Baku, Azerbaijan, described the memorandum not as a concession, but as, in his own words, a declaration of U.S. defeat. He stated flatly that the actual text of the agreement does not contain any legal clause mandating the purchase of American commodities. No clause. Nothing in writing requiring Iran to buy a single soybean from American farmers. Now, here is where this gets even more serious, because this is not just a war of words between two governments. This dispute is now tearing apart Iran's own internal politics. Raja News, an outlet affiliated with Iran's hardline Paydari Front political faction, published two separate editorials on June 23rd, arguing that this entire food purchase mechanism violates the actual memorandum of understanding that was signed just 1 week earlier. They are pointing specifically to Article 11 of the agreement, which states that frozen funds must be made, in the document's own language, fully available to beneficiaries designated by Iran's own central bank. Not designated by Washington, designated by Iran. The hardliners are arguing that if Trump gets to dictate that the money must be spent on American corn and wheat, that directly violates the text Iran's own president signed. And this is not just a fringe complaint from extremists. According to reporting from RFE/RL, even more moderate voices inside Iran, including many conservatives who are not part of the hardline faction, reject Trump's framing, arguing that the broader memorandum actually benefits Iran considerably more than it benefits the United States. So you now have Iranian hardliners and Iranian moderates, two groups that almost never agree on anything in Tehran's fractured political landscape, both pushing back against the same claim coming out of the White House. That kind of unified domestic pressure inside Iran is exactly the sort of thing that can make Iran's negotiators dig in harder at the table in the weeks ahead. There's an even more confusing layer to this story that deserves direct attention. Just one day before Ghalibaf's public denial, Iran International reported that Iran's own state-affiliated Mehr news agency had separately published details of what it described as a 14-point draft memorandum of understanding, which it claimed provides for the release of $24 billion in frozen Iranian assets during the 60-day talks. That same report noted explicitly that this draft has not been independently verified and that neither Iranian nor American officials have publicly confirmed its actual contents. So even inside Iran's own state media ecosystem, different outlets are publishing different numbers, different terms, and different descriptions of the very same document. 12 billion, 24 billion, 500 million in farm goods, no legal clause requiring any purchases at all. 4 completely different numbers, 4 completely different frames, all describing one short memorandum that the public still has not been allowed to read in full. Now let us turn to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, because his sudden reemergence into this story today reveals an entirely separate layer of internal American confusion that has nothing to do with Tehran at all. CNN reported today that for more than a week, America's top diplomat was conspicuously quiet about something that would have seemed very much in his own wheelhouse, a nascent agreement with Iran. Rubio simply was not speaking publicly about the deal, while Vance, Kushner, and Witkoff were leading the actual negotiations in Switzerland. But now, finally, Rubio is speaking, and what he is saying is creating new problems rather than resolving old ones. Speaking to reporters after landing in Abu Dhabi this week, Rubio was directly pressed on what CNN called an apparent dissonance in the Trump administration's own Iran policy. Here is the specific contradiction. The signed memorandum of understanding explicitly includes Lebanon as part of the broader ceasefire with Iran. But at the very same time, the administration created an entirely separate negotiating track specifically between Israel and Lebanon, a track that was deliberately designed, according to CNN's own reporting, to prevent Tehran from having any say in what happens in Beirut. So Lebanon is inside the Iran deal, and Lebanon is also being negotiated completely separately from the Iran deal simultaneously by the same administration. When reporters asked Rubio to explain this, he insisted the Lebanon file is, in his own words, separate from the Iranian one. He said there's an Iranian issue with regard to Lebanon, and that is their support and sponsorship of Hezbollah. And so that factor will be discussed as part of our conversations with the Iranians. Listen carefully to what Rubio is actually saying there. He is drawing a line between Lebanon itself, which he says is being handled through the separate Israel-Lebanon track, and Iran's support for Hezbollah specifically, which he says will be discussed with Iran. That is an extremely fine distinction, and it directly conflicts with what is actually written in the signed 14-point document, which the state of play analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies confirmed includes language calling for, quote, an immediate and permanent end to military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon, as one of the very first clauses of the entire agreement. And here's the detail that makes Rubio's position even harder to defend. The Times of Israel's own live reporting from this same week noted directly that it's not at all clear the extent to which Trump himself agrees with Rubio on this, given that Trump insisted just last week that Iran should be allowed to keep some of its missiles because, in Trump's reasoning, other countries in the region also have them. So Rubio is trying to carve Lebanon out as a separate issue from Iran. Trump is publicly defending Iran's right to keep weapons that threaten the exact same region. Two senior officials in the same administration describing two different versions of how this deal actually treats Iran's regional behavior. This pattern of contradiction from Rubio specifically is not new, and it deserves to be placed in its proper historical context tonight. Foreign Policy magazine documented back in early March, at the very start of this war, that Rubio gave an explanation for why America joined Israel's war against Iran that directly contradicted what Trump himself was telling the public. Republicans in Congress, including House Speaker Mike Johnson, ended up effectively blaming Israel for dragging America into the war, saying because Israel was determined to act with or without the U.S., the commander-in-chief had a very difficult decision to make. When Foreign Policy asked the White House directly about the apparent contradiction between Rubio and Trump's statements, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responded with a lengthy statement insisting Trump's decision was grounded in Iran, posing a direct and imminent threat to the United States without actually resolving the contradiction itself. And there is one more example of this same pattern worth mentioning tonight, because it goes directly to the core justification for this entire 117-day war. CNN reported in early April that Trump used a White House address to claim Iran was right at the doorstep of a nuclear weapon, a claim that CNN's own reporting states directly contradicts U.S. and Western intelligence assessments. In that same address, Trump argued that regime change was not our goal, while simultaneously saying regime change has occurred because of all of their original leader's death. Rubio, meanwhile, speaking to ABC News around that same time, used far more careful and qualified language, saying only that there's some fractures going on there internally, and describing Iran's clerical regime, not Iran's people, as the actual problem. Trump claiming credit for regime change while denying that was ever the goal, and Rubio describing internal fractures in much more cautious diplomatic terms, is the exact same pattern of contradiction we are watching play out again today over frozen funds and Lebanon. Let us also bring you the broader picture of where the actual peace process stands tonight, because amid all of this public confusion, there has been genuine, measurable progress that deserves to be reported honestly. According to data and analytics company Kepler, ship traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is increasing. 39 ships crossed through the strait on Monday alone, following approximately 92 crossings over the weekend between Friday and Sunday. That is real, trackable, independently verified movement, regardless of who controls the narrative around it. The United States has also waived sanctions on Iranian oil for 60 days following the first day of talks, and Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed on social media that sanctions on Iranian oil exports and petrochemical sales had been waived, the naval blockade had been lifted, and a number of frozen Iranian assets had been released. There has also been real movement on Lebanon specifically. Iran and the United States agreed during the Switzerland talks to create what both sides are calling a deconfliction cell, specifically intended to address the ongoing fighting between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Araghchi himself declared major progress toward ending the war in Lebanon, while cautioning that the true test of the entire agreement would be the actual effectiveness of that deconfliction cell once it begins operating. And just this week, the U.S. Senate passed its own resolution in a 50-48 vote, directing Trump to remove U.S. forces from hostilities with Iran unless Congress explicitly authorizes further military action. Because that measure is what's known as a concurrent resolution. It does not require Trump's signature and carries disputed legal force, but it represents yet another formal institutional signal that Washington itself remains deeply divided over how this war has been fought and how this peace is being managed. Here is the complete picture as of tonight, June 25th, 2026, day 117 of this war. Iran's chief negotiator publicly called Trump's farm goods claim false and mocked American agriculture and diplomacy in the same social media post. Trump insists frozen funds will be spent exclusively on American corn, wheat, and soybeans. Iranian hardliners and moderates alike are accusing the administration of violating the actual signed text of the agreement. Secretary Rubio, after more than a week of silence, gave an explanation of the Lebanon situation that appears to directly conflict with what Trump has said about Iran's role in the region, continuing a documented pattern of contradictory statements between these two officials that stretches back to the earliest days of this war. And despite all of this public confusion, ship traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is measurably increasing, sanctions have been waived, and a new deconfliction mechanism for Lebanon is now operational, even as its real effectiveness remains entirely untested. America, here is my question for you tonight. Iran's own top negotiator just called your president's description of this deal false in public, using insulting language about American agriculture and trust. Your own Secretary of State just gave an explanation of part of this deal that does not match what your own president and vice president have been saying for over a week. Here's what I want to know from you. When the people running your own government cannot agree on what they actually negotiated, who should the American public actually believe? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story is far from over, and we will be here with you to sort through every single contradiction as it happens.